The water was still warm when they found Isabelle Dupont floating face down in her marble bathhouse, her silk nightgown clinging to her lifeless body like Spanish moss on a cypress limb. By then, Eliza Monroe had already vanished into the Louisiana bayou, carrying with her a secret that would haunt Willow Bend Plantation for generations. What drove this enslaved woman to hold her mistress beneath the surface until the bubbles stopped rising? And how did she survive in the treacherous swamplands where even the bravest men feared to tread? The morning sun stretched long, golden fingers across the plantation lawn as Eliza made her way toward the grand bathhouse, her bare feet whispering against dew-damp grass. The ornate structure stood apart from the main house, its white columns gleaming like bleached bones beneath the magnolia trees. Inside, marble walls caught the rising steam, and the scent of jasmine oil drifted in the heavy air. Every dawn, Eliza drew fresh water, heated it to her mistress's liking, and filled the pool until the reflections shimmered like liquid glass. She was 19, her small hands calloused yet graceful from years of tending to her owner's comfort. Purchased from a New Orleans auction at 12, she had learned every motion by heart, the careful folding of towels, the precise stirring of fragrant oils, the rhythm of scrubbing pale skin that never knew the sun. Isabelle Dupont, the lady of Willow Bend, reclined in the pool when Eliza entered. At 32, she was beauty made brittle by privilege, skin pale as milk, auburn curls pinned with imported pearls, eyes green as bottle glass. Her gaze could warm or wound in an instant. "You're late," Isabelle said, her voice dripping with honeyed southern charm sharpened by steel. Eliza kept her eyes lowered. "Begging your pardon, Miss Isabelle." Master Dupont needed his boots cleaned after his morning ride. The truth, though partial, hid another. Before coming here, she had lingered by her sister's bedside. Lila, only 15, had been feverish all night, and worse, had begun to attract the dangerous attention of the master's son. Isabelle's laugh cracked through the room like breaking glass. "My husband's boots, more precious than my comfort." Imagine that. She sank deeper into the steaming water, the ripples shimmering across the marble. The bathhouse had been her wedding gift from her father, built to rival the Roman baths she had admired during her schooling abroad. Eliza set the basket of soaps beside the pool and knelt, her movements practiced, silent. The tension between mistress and servant had thickened over recent months, ever since Isabelle learned something that had shifted their unspoken boundaries. "Come closer," Isabelle murmured, extending an arm from the water. Eliza obeyed. Without warning, the white woman's hand shot forward and clamped around her wrist, nails digging crescent moons into dark skin. "I've been thinking," Isabelle whispered, "about our talk." "About your sister?" Eliza's stomach tightened. That conversation, whispered right here 3 nights before, had been her desperate plea. She had begged Isabelle to keep young Lila safe from the master's son. She had offered anything, any service, any favor, if only the girl could be spared. Isabelle had smiled that day, a smile that promised salvation but delivered something else entirely. Now, that memory pressed against Eliza's ribs like a knife. "Miss Isabelle, please," she murmured, trying to free her hand without open struggle. The steam grew heavier, pressing down like a shroud. "Begin with my shoulders," Isabelle commanded, finally releasing her. Eliza dipped the cloth into the scented water and began to scrub, circular motions over flawless skin. She had done this ritual 1,000 times, yet today each touch felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. "I received a letter from my cousin in Charleston," Isabelle said softly. "There's talk of a new proposal. Slaves who prove their loyalty might earn special consideration." Eliza's hands paused, just for a heartbeat. She knew her mistress's tone, the one that preceded manipulation dressed as kindness. Isabelle tilted her head back, eyes half closed in pleasure. "Think of it, Eliza. Freedom, perhaps safety for your sister. All I require is continued devotion." Absolute devotion. The meaning slid between them like a serpent. Isabelle wasn't speaking of service or obedience. She was naming ownership of body and soul. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. The scrub burned against Isabelle's skin, but she dared not stop. "I understand, Miss Isabelle," she whispered, voice steady though her insides trembled. The words tasted like ash. but they were the only shield she had left for Lila. "Good girl," Isabel murmured, trailing a wet finger down Eliza's cheek, a gesture so intimate it felt like violence. Days turned into weeks of silent humiliation. Isabel summoned her to the bathhouse at all hours under false pretenses, and Eliza obeyed, numb with resignation. The other slaves noticed. Whispers spread like wind through the quarters. Yet Lila remained untouched for now, and that alone kept Eliza alive. Then, one humid afternoon while cleaning Isabel's writing desk, Eliza found a letter half hidden beneath a stack of fashion catalogues. Her heart stilled as she read the elegant script. It was indeed from the cousin in Charleston, but it spoke only of heat and gossip. No mention of laws, loyalty, or freedom. The lie struck like lightning. Isabel had fabricated everything. There had never been any promise of protection, no law that could save Lila. All those nights of degradation had been for nothing. Rage swallowed Eliza whole, a fury so bright it burned away fear itself. That night she lay on her straw pallet staring at the rafters, the whisper of the swamp wind like a voice calling her name. In her mind, she saw the marble bathhouse, the water, the silence, the stillness she could make permanent. She thought of Lila's innocence and of Isabel's laughter echoing through those polished walls. By dawn, her decision was carved in stone. The next morning came gray and heavy, thunderheads brooding over the bayou. Eliza carried her basket as always, soaps neatly arranged, but hidden beneath the towels was a small vial of laudanum she had stolen from the house apothecary, just enough to quiet a body's strength. When Isabel entered, radiant and humming, Eliza greeted her with her usual composure. "I brought you something new today, Miss Isabel," she said as she poured the drugged oil into the steaming bath. "From a healer near New Orleans. Helps a body rest easy," Isabel smiled indulgently. "You do think of everything, my dear." The scent of jasmine thickened. As Eliza worked, Isabel's eyelids drooped, her words slurring. "So soothing," she murmured. Eliza's voice dropped to a whisper. "It comes from someone who knows what suffering means." Something in her tone sliced through the haze. Isabel blinked, alarm dawning too late. She tried to rise, but Eliza's hands pressed down, gentle at first, then firm, then unyielding. "You lied to me," Eliza said, each word steady as heartbeat. "You lied about Lila." Bubbles broke the surface. The scent of jasmine turned sharp as death. Isabel's fingers clawed at Eliza's arms, drawing blood, but Eliza did not let go. The water swallowed the mistress's final scream. When the surface stilled, Eliza stared at the pale shape drifting beneath. The act was done, and Willow Bend would never be silent the same way again. Eliza's breath came shallow and trembling as she knelt by the still water. The scent of jasmine and rose oil clung to her skin, thick and suffocating. The marble bath that had once shimmered with luxury now reflected something darker. The ghost of a woman whose power had finally met its reckoning. For a long time Eliza could not move. She just stared, numb, at Isabel DuPont's lifeless form, her auburn hair fanning out beneath the water like riverweed. There was no triumph, no relief, only the dull ache of something broken beyond repair. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and yet, deep beneath the fear and guilt, there pulsed a terrible calm. Lila was safe, at least for now. That had to mean something. When her body stopped shaking, Eliza rose and went to work. She cleaned the marble walls with practiced precision, scrubbing away any trace of the struggle. The small scratches Isabel's nails had left on her arms burned, but she ignored them. Every corner, every edge of the bathhouse, she knew them all from years of servitude, and now that knowledge became her salvation. She arranged the scene carefully. Isabel's body, floating serenely, might look as though she'd simply slipped beneath the water, overcome by the heat or her own vanity. The laudanum would make the story believable. Its presence in her system could easily be mistaken for self-medication. Before leaving, Eliza knelt once more beside the bath. She touched her mistress's cold forehead, not in forgiveness, but in farewell. "May you never rise again to harm another," she whispered. The steam curled around her words and vanished, like a prayer too heavy for heaven. When she stepped outside, the world looked unchanged. The sun had climbed higher, burning through the last of the fog. The cicadas sang from the trees, and the plantation carried on as if nothing monumental had just occurred within its white columns. Eliza returned to the quarters with the same steady walk she had used every day of her life. No one questioned her calm face or the faint smell of rosewater that followed her. She helped stir the morning cornmeal, braided Lila's hair, even smiled when the child laughed weakly at a joke one of the older women made. But her mind was already miles away, deep in the swampland, where the cypress roots curled like fingers, and freedom hid beneath the stagnant water. It was nearly noon when the scream came. One of the house slaves, sent to fetch towels, found Isabel. The cry tore through the air like the wail of a wounded animal, echoing across the fields until even the field hands stopped their work. Men came running, overseers, servants, the master himself. The sound of chaos rose, overlapping shouts and hurried footsteps, until Willow Bend was alive with panic. Eliza joined the crowd, forcing her face into an expression of horror. She pushed through the throng just in time to see Master DuPont standing at the bath's edge, his face pale and rigid. Isabel's body floated motionless in the water, her silk gown clinging to her like seaweed. The overseer tried to pull her out, but the master stopped him with a shaking hand. His lips moved soundlessly, perhaps whispering her name, perhaps cursing the sky. "Lord have mercy," someone whispered behind Eliza. She let tears fall, real enough in their confusion. She had imagined this moment 100 times, but not the weight of it, not the way the silence after the scream would feel like judgment itself. By evening, the investigation began. Questions flew through the house like hornets. Who had last seen Miss Isabel alive? Who drew her bath? Who entered or left the bathhouse that morning? Eliza knew the rhythm of suspicion. It was inevitable, a tide she could delay but not stop. When her turn came, she clasped her hands tightly and told her story. Simple, believable, laced with just enough truth to sound natural. "I brought the soaps and filled the water." "Sir," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "Miss Isabel was already bathing. I stepped outside to fetch fresh towels, and when I returned, she hesitated, letting the tears fall. She was gone under." Master DuPont studied her face, eyes hollow with grief. "You didn't hear her cry out?" "No, sir. I swear by God I didn't." He turned away, and she knew she had bought herself a little time. That night, Willow Bend was draped in mourning. Candles flickered in every window. The house slaves moved silently, their eyes wide with fear. Because when a white woman died in strange circumstances, someone of their color always paid the price. Eliza sat on her cot beside Lila, stroking her sister's hair. The girl's fever had broken, leaving her fragile but awake. "You all right?" Lila whispered. "I will be," Eliza said softly. "We both will. But we can't stay. Leave?" "Go where?" Eliza looked toward the small window. The night beyond was thick and humming with insects, the air heavy with promise and danger. "The swamp," she said simply. Lila's eyes widened. "They say folks disappear in there. The ones who try, they don't come back." "Then maybe we'll be the first who do," Eliza murmured, but she knew the truth. If she stayed, the noose awaited. The whispers would start soon. Someone would remember how often Miss Isabel had summoned her to the bathhouse. Someone would mention jealousy, or witchcraft, or rage, and when the overseer brought his questions again, she would not survive them. By the second night after the death, her mind was set. She gathered her few belongings, a small bundle of food, a length of rope, a flint stone. Into the bundle she tucked 2 keepsakes, her grandmother's worn ribbon and a bent iron cross that had belonged to her father. They were charms of protection, remnants of faith from before chains and plantations had tried to strip such things away. In the deep hours before dawn, Eliza kissed Lila's forehead. "If anyone asks, you tell them I ran," she whispered. "You tell them nothing more." Tears slid down Lila's cheeks, but she nodded. "You'll come back?" "When it's safe." It was a lie, but a merciful one. Eliza knew there would never be safety again. Only survival. She slipped from the quarters like a shadow, her bare feet silent on the dirt. The plantation slept behind her, its big house glowing faintly under a thin moon. Beyond the fences, the world changed. The earth grew softer, wetter, the air filled with the croak of frogs and the hiss of insects. The bayou waited. Her first steps into the water felt like stepping into another world. Mud sucked at her ankles, and unseen things brushed her legs. Cypress trees loomed like sentinels, their branches hung with gray veils of moss. Somewhere far off, an owl hooted, long and mournful. The swamp smelled of decay and life all tangled together. To most, it was a place of death. To Eliza, it was a promise. She moved slowly, testing each step with a stick she'd cut from a branch. The black water rippled beneath the faint starlight, reflecting only pieces of her shadow. Alligators drifted like ghosts, their eyes glowing ember red. But she kept going, deeper into the maze of trees and water until the lights of Willow Bend were swallowed by darkness. Hours passed. The mosquitoes found her quickly, biting until her arms and neck burned. Sweat dripped into her eyes. Thirst clawed at her throat, but she dared not drink from the murky pools. The air buzzed with life, and every sound, every splash, every rustle seemed to whisper her name. By dawn, she found a patch of half-dry ground where the cypress roots rose like knotted knuckles. She collapsed there, exhausted, wrapping her arms around herself as the first rays of sunlight crept through the mist. The bayou stretched endlessly before her, vast, ancient, alive. Behind her lay the plantation, the bathhouse, and the ghost of a woman who would never let her rest. Ahead lay freedom or death or both. She had no map, no guide, no promise of help. Only the steady pulse of her own heartbeat and the quiet conviction that she could not, would not go back. The sun rose through a veil of mist, turning the bayou into a world of liquid gold and shadow. Eliza stirred from her fitful sleep, her limbs stiff, her throat raw with thirst. She had escaped Willow Bend, but freedom felt heavy and wild, a living thing that pressed close on all sides. Around her, the swamp hummed with unseen life. Dragonflies hovered like jeweled sparks. A turtle slipped into the water with a soft plop. Somewhere in the distance, something much larger moved. Slow, deliberate. And Eliza held her breath until the sound faded. She spent the morning moving carefully, keeping to the shallows where the water was waist-deep but clear enough to see the bottom. She used her stick to test for hidden drop-offs and snakes. Each step forward was a small victory. She found berries, sour but edible, and chewed them slowly, savoring even the bitterness. When the sun reached its highest point, the heat became unbearable. The air felt like soup, thick and stifling. Her clothes clung to her skin, heavy with sweat and swamp water. The mosquitoes came in clouds, biting through the fabric, leaving welts that burned. She swatted until her arms ached. The bayou was testing her, whispering in every hiss and ripple, "Go back. You don't belong here." But Eliza had nothing to return to. By the third day, she began to hallucinate from hunger and exhaustion. The trees looked like people watching her, their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost human. She thought she heard Lila's voice once, calling faintly across the water. She waded toward the sound, stumbling through reeds, only to find silence waiting for her. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She pressed forward until dusk. The sky turned violet and the shadows deepened. And then she heard it. Faint at first, like the hum of wind through leaves. A voice, then another, then several, rising and falling together in rhythm. Singing. Eliza froze, her heart hammering. The sound came from somewhere ahead, a melody low and haunting, full of sorrow and strength. She moved toward it, pushing aside the drooping branches, her bare feet sinking in mud. When she broke through the last tangle of vines, she stopped and stared. A small lake spread before her, its surface black and mirror-smooth. Across the water, she saw light, faint fires hidden under dense canopy. There were figures moving between the trees, carrying baskets, stirring pots, tending to small huts built high among the roots. The voices she had heard belonged to people like her. For a long moment, she just watched, afraid that if she stepped closer, the vision would vanish like a fever dream. Then one of the figures turned and saw her. A woman's voice called out, sharp and commanding. Within seconds, shadows moved all around the lake, men and women emerging from the trees, silent, armed with long knives and makeshift spears. "Who's there?" someone demanded. Eliza raised her hands slowly, her voice shaking. "Please. I mean no harm, I need help." They circled her warily, faces dark and watchful, eyes glinting in the firelight. Then one woman stepped forward, tall, wrapped in a headscarf of faded crimson, her presence calm and sure. "I'm Mama Brigitte," she said. Her voice was steady, filled with authority that didn't need shouting. "You running from something? Or to something?" Eliza met her gaze and answered honestly. "Both." A flicker of understanding passed through the woman's eyes. She nodded once and the tension in the air eased. "Then you're one of us." They led her into the hidden camp. The settlement was unlike anything Eliza had imagined. Dozens of wooden platforms and huts stood on stilts above the water, connected by narrow bridges of cypress planks. Smoke curled lazily from small fires carrying the scent of fish and herbs. Chickens clucked from makeshift coops lashed to tree trunks, and children darted between the huts, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. These were Maroons, escaped slaves who had carved a life out of the swamp, far from the plantations and their overseers. They called their settlement Belmire, the beautiful marsh. For the first time in her life, Eliza saw black men and women walking freely, unchained, speaking to one another without fear. They welcomed her cautiously but kindly, feeding her from a pot of fish stew that tasted like salvation. Over the next days, she learned their ways. They lived by the rhythms of the swamp, fishing, trapping, growing small patches of rice on floating gardens. They spoke a mix of English, Creole, and the old languages carried from Africa. They had scouts posted along every approach, and when strangers came too close, the settlement disappeared into mist within minutes. Mama Brigitte was their leader, part healer, part priestess. She read signs in bird calls and wind patterns, and people came to her for guidance as naturally as breathing. Under her care, Eliza's strength returned. She helped gather herbs, mended nets, and learned to navigate the hidden waterways. She spoke little at first, afraid her past might bring trouble to this fragile refuge, but the others seemed to understand the silence of those who had run too far to trust easily. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, Eliza began to feel something she had not felt since childhood: safety. Not the safety of walls or owner's rules, but the kind that grows in the open, among people who share your scars. Yet at night, sleep still brought ghosts. She would see Isabel's face beneath the water, her green eyes open, her lips moving though no words came. Some nights Eliza woke gasping, her hands trembling as if she could still feel the weight of her mistress's shoulders beneath them. When she confessed this to Mama Brigitte one evening, the older woman listened quietly, stirring the fire. "You did what needed doing," Brigitte said finally. "Ain't no sin in fighting back against evil, but you got to make peace with the spirit of what you done. Otherwise it'll follow you." "I don't want peace," Eliza said bitterly. "Not if it means forgetting." "Peace don't mean forgetting," the older woman replied. "It means learning how to live while remembering." Eliza said nothing more, but the words sank deep. In time, the people of Belmire came to see Eliza as one of their own. Her knowledge of herbs and remedies, learned from her grandmother back on the plantation, proved valuable. She treated wounds, eased fevers, and tended to mothers giving birth in the humid darkness of the swamp. Her literacy, a skill taught to her in secret by an old house servant, made her indispensable. She kept records, wrote messages that were smuggled through the waterways to other Maroon settlements, and read aloud the rare scraps of news that reached them from the outside world. But her name began to spread beyond Belmire. Rumors drifted downriver to the plantations, stories of a young woman who had killed her mistress and vanished into the swamp. Some said she had joined a band of escaped slaves. Others whispered that she had become something less human, a spirit of vengeance who dragged cruel masters into the water by their ankles. Eliza heard the stories secondhand, brought by new arrivals who spoke her name in awe or fear. "The girl who drowned the white lady," they called her. She said nothing to confirm or deny it. Some legends, she decided, were better left to grow on their own. Still, the danger was real. Bounty hunters began combing the swamps, their torches glowing through the mist like distant stars. Dogs barked from the shore, trained to follow the scent of fear. Whenever the alarm was raised, the people of Bayou vanished, slipping into hollow trees, hidden tunnels, and underwater shelters. One night, Eliza crouched inside the trunk of an ancient cypress while men passed so close she could smell their tobacco. "That Monroe girl's worth good money," one of them muttered. "Master DuPont's offering a fortune for her alive. Alive, not dead." Eliza pressed her forehead against the damp wood, her heart pounding. It was only a matter of time before the hunt reached this far. When the voices finally faded and silence returned, she stepped out and looked across the black water. The stars reflected there like shattered glass. She was free, but hunted. Safe, but haunted. And somewhere deep inside, she knew her story in the bayou was far from over. The seasons turned slowly in the bayou, each day a mirror of the last, mist and heat, water and silence. Yet beneath that sameness, Eliza's world was changing. By the second year of her life among the maroons of Belmere, she was no longer merely a fugitive. She had become something else, a name spoken in whispers, a living symbol of defiance carried from one plantation to the next, like contraband hope. The stories spread faster than fire in dry grass. Some said she'd grown wings like a heron and could vanish into fog. Others claimed she could breathe underwater, that she lived with the ghosts of drowned souls who guided her through the swamp. Each version made her less human, more legend. Eliza did nothing to correct them. In a land where power was myth, a little fear was its own kind of weapon. Still, she carried her guilt like a shadow. Isabelle DuPont's face never left her dreams. In the humid dark of Belmere's nights, Eliza sometimes woke to the sound of water bubbling, as though someone were drowning just beneath the surface. But daylight brought purpose, and purpose kept the nightmares at bay. Under Mama Brigitte's guidance, Eliza learned to lead. She studied the tides, the wind, the trails through cypress roots that only those born to the swamp could follow. She learned to build traps and steer pirogues, small, narrow boats that could slip silently between the trees. Most of all, she learned strategy. "You know how they think," Brigitte said one evening, stirring a pot of rice and smoked fish. "You've been inside their houses, heard their talk. That makes you valuable. The swamp protects us, but it won't protect us forever. You got the mind to fight back." Eliza hesitated. "Fight? Against the plantations?" Brigitte smiled faintly. "You fought back once. You think the spirit saved you just to live quiet? Freedom ain't a gift, girl. It's a battle that never ends." And so Eliza began to plan. At first, the raids were small, single boats drifting out under the cover of fog to free one or two captives from nearby estates. The Maroons would strike swiftly, leaving behind confusion and whispers of ghosts. Their knowledge of the swamp made pursuit impossible. The rescued slaves were brought to Belmere, nursed back to strength and given a choice: stay or travel north to safety along hidden routes. Each raid emboldened them. Each success fed the legend. Eliza was cautious at first, always thinking 3 moves ahead. But inside her, something restless grew, part vengeance, part duty. The night she learned the truth about Lila was the night that caution died. It was during a raid near Baton Rouge. Among the rescued was a young woman named Clara, who had once served at Willow Bend. She recognized Eliza immediately, her eyes widening with shock and recognition. "You're alive," Clara whispered. "We thought they'd caught you." "Tell me," Eliza said, her throat tightening. "My sister, Lila, where is she?" Clara's face fell. "She's gone, Eliza. Master DuPont's son. Her voice broke. "He killed her after you ran. Beat her for refusing him. Said it was your fault." The words struck like a physical blow. For a moment, Eliza couldn't breathe. The swamp spun around her, the air thick with the ghosts of everything she'd lost. She had killed for Lila, destroyed a life and her own soul for the promise of saving her. And still, her sister had died. For weeks after that, Eliza wandered the bayou alone. She followed the twisting waterways until even she didn't know where she was. her reflection merging with the shadows in the black water. She whispered prayers to the spirits of her ancestors, begged them to explain why her sacrifice had failed, but the swamp gave no answers, only silence. It was Mama Brigitte who finally came for her. The older woman found her sitting on a half-sunken log, knees drawn to her chest, her face streaked with tears. "Your sister's death ain't on your soul," Brigitte said softly, settling beside her. "That blood belongs to the men who made her a slave, to the system that taught them to see her as property. You did what you thought might save her. That's all any of us can do." Eliza stared into the murky water. "Then what's the point of surviving?" "The point," Brigitte said, "is to make sure others do too. You want to honor her? Fight for the ones still breathing." Something hardened inside Eliza that night. Grief turned to resolve, not the reckless fury that had drowned Isabel, but a colder, sharper kind. If Lila's death could not be undone, it could at least have meaning. She returned to Belmire different. Leaner, harder, focused. The next time the council met to plan a rescue, she took command without asking. From then on, the raids grew bolder. Entire work gangs vanished overnight from plantations along the river. Storehouses burned. Overseers woke to find their whips nailed to trees, their dogs dead at the gate. Fear spread through the white towns like fever. The Maroons began calling her La Sirène Noire, the Black Siren, for the way she appeared out of the mist, her voice calm and sure even in chaos. To her people, she became a leader. To the masters, she became a curse. Posters appeared in New Orleans and Baton Rouge offering rewards for her capture, dead or alive. The amount grew with every failed pursuit. Soldiers and bounty hunters began combing the bayou with dogs and torches. One night, the dogs came too close. The warning drums echoed through Belmire, and the settlement dissolved into the swamp like smoke. Eliza led a small group of children through a submerged tunnel to a hidden air pocket beneath an uprooted cypress. The children trembled, their tiny hands clutching her arms as the sound of men's voices passed overhead. When the danger finally faded, one little boy whispered, "They'll find us next time, won't they?" Eliza met his gaze and smiled faintly. Not if we move faster than fear. But even she could see the truth written in Mama Brigitte's tired eyes. The noose was tightening. By the third year of her escape, Belmire was more fortress than sanctuary. Traps were laid along every entrance. Scouts patrolled constantly. Food was harder to find as the soldiers destroyed nearby resources. The swamp, once their shield, was becoming a cage. Then came the message, a warning smuggled through a sympathizer in Baton Rouge. A massive sweep was coming. Over 300 men, soldiers and hired hunters, with boats built to navigate the bayou. They would burn every settlement, kill or capture anyone they found. At the council meeting that night, voices rose in anger and fear. Some wanted to flee deeper into the swamp. Others argued for surrender, believing death was better than capture. Eliza waited until they had all spoken. Then she stood. "We can't hide forever," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying across the circle. "They'll find us, and they'll kill us one by one. But if we strike first, if we make them bleed, they'll remember us as more than ghosts. They'll remember us as people who fought." Brigitte looked at her long and hard. "You talking about war, child?" "I'm talking about choice," Eliza replied. "We've been running our whole lives. Maybe it's time they ran from us." Silence followed, heavy, electric. Then slowly, heads began to nod. That night, under a moonless sky, plans were made. Messages were sent upriver to other maroon bands. The swamp would rise as one, and when dawn came, the mist rolled across the bayou like breath from a sleeping god. It was the calm before the reckoning. The weeks that followed were heavy with purpose and dread. The Maroons of Belmire moved like shadows, silent and relentless, preparing for the largest resistance the Louisiana bayou had ever seen. They sharpened machetes, fitted nails, and scrap iron to wooden clubs, and sealed messages in waxed gourds that floated downriver to other hidden communities. Eliza hardly slept. Each night, she walked the perimeter of the swamp settlement, her torch dimmed to a flicker. She memorized every path through the cypress maze, every escape route in case of ambush. The frogs croaked in endless rhythm, and the air shimmered with the promise of storm. When the time came, it was November 1841, a night so dark that the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The signal passed silently through the marshes. 3 owl calls, then 2. Across miles of water and fog, 7 different maroon settlements answered. The raids began just before dawn, boats carved through the mist, narrow pirogues gliding like phantoms between the trees. At each plantation along the river, Garrison, Bellefontaine, Devereux, and beyond, guards fell to the flash of steel before their torches could flare. Locks broke, chains fell. Dozens of enslaved men and women poured from cabins, barefoot and terrified, until Eliza's calm voice met them in the dark. "This way," she whispered. "You're free now. Move quick." Her people ferried them too, waiting boats, pushing off into the black water before gunfire could sound. Dogs barked in the distance, lanterns swung, but by the time the alarm spread, the Maroons were gone, swallowed whole by the bayou. At sunrise, more than 200 souls had vanished from the plantations, leaving behind chaos and disbelief. The raids struck not only at wealth, but pride. The master's illusion of control had shattered overnight. But Eliza had saved the boldest strike for last. She stood in the prow of her boat as it drifted toward Willow Bend Plantation, the place where it had all begun. The house was smaller now than she remembered. Or perhaps she had simply grown larger in her own eyes. The marble bathhouse gleamed in the dawn light, half hidden by vines, its once bright columns cracked and gray. "This is where it ends," she murmured. Her crew fanned out silently. The guards, lazy from years of easy power, barely stirred before the first blow landed. Within minutes, the yard erupted in shouts and gunfire. The enslaved men and women of Willow Bend, those who had grown up, believing escape was a sin punishable by death, hesitated only a moment before joining the attack. Whips turned against overseers, torches against the storehouse. Eliza ran through the front doors. The house smelled the same, jasmine and candle wax, but the halls echoed with panic now instead of laughter. She moved through them like a ghost, her bare feet whispering over the parquet floor. In the study, Henry DuPont, the master of Willow Bend, sat frozen behind his desk. His pistol shook in his hand. The man who had once commanded hundreds could barely lift his eyes to meet hers. "Eliza," he breathed. "God help us." Her voice was calm. "He already did. He gave you every chance to stop." He raised the gun, but his hands were trembling too violently. Before he could fire, one of the Maroons stepped forward and wrenched the weapon away. Eliza held DuPont's gaze for a long moment, then said softly, "You'll live." That's punishment enough. By dawn, the raid was over. The freed slaves crowded the yard, faces lit by the burning remains of the overseer's quarters. Some wept, others simply stood in shock, tasting freedom for the first time. Eliza walked to the bathhouse. The marble walls were streaked with mold now, the pool half filled with rainwater. She stood at its edge and closed her eyes. "Lila," she whispered. "I did what I could." A faint breeze rustled the moss, carrying the scent of magnolia and smoke. For the first time since that terrible morning years ago, she felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness, but a kind of weary understanding. They left Willow Bend before the soldiers arrived, melting into the swamp once more. But this time, the bayou could not hide them for long. Within days, the government's wrath came down like thunder. Soldiers in grey uniforms poured into the marshes with rifles and torches. They burned settlements, poisoned water caches, slaughtered anyone who resisted. Belle Meyer was one of the first to fall. Eliza and her people fought where they could, ambushing patrols, striking and vanishing into the mist. Yet the pressure was relentless. One by one, the hidden sanctuaries were destroyed. Refugees streamed through the bayou, bringing tales of fire and betrayal. During one council meeting, an old maroon named Joseph spoke, his voice rough as gravel. "They aim to wipe us clean from the earth. We can't fight armies, child, not with sticks and dreams." Eliza looked around at the faces illuminated by the flickering fire, the mothers clutching children, the men too weary to speak. "If we don't fight," she said quietly, "they'll destroy us anyway. But maybe we can buy time for others." "What others?" someone asked bitterly. "The ones yet unborn," she said. Her plan was desperate but bold. A final assault, a message carved in flame that would echo through generations. "If we must die," she told them, "then let's die standing." Mama Brigitte watched her with eyes full of sorrow and pride. "You're turning yourself into legend, girl." Eliza's reply was a whisper. "Maybe legend's all that's left." They struck again, one last time. The plantations along the bayou woke to find their fields burning, their boats stolen, their overseers gone. It was not victory, but defiance, and that was enough. When the retaliation came, it was brutal. Soldiers surrounded Belmire with boats and set fire to the swamp itself, turning the night sky orange. The maroons scattered, vanishing into the water. Gunfire echoed for hours. By dawn, the settlement was ash. The survivors regrouped deeper in the marsh, but Eliza knew it couldn't last. Too many were dead. Too many wounded. The dream of Belmire was dying. That night, sitting by the flickering remains of a campfire, she made her final decision. She would surrender. Mama Brigitte tried to stop her. "They'll hang you," she said. "I know." "Then why?" "Because my death will buy their lives," Eliza said simply. "The soldiers want me, not them. If I go, maybe they'll let the rest be." Brigitte's eyes filled with tears. "The spirits chose you for more than dying, child." "Maybe, but dying's part of it." At dawn, she left alone, walking through knee-deep water toward the place they had chosen, a small island where cypress roots formed a natural altar. The soldiers waited there, muskets ready, their commander grim and silent. Eliza approached without fear, her head held high. Her clothes were simple, her wrists bare. The chains they placed on her wrists felt almost familiar, but her spirit remained untouchable. "You have my word," she told the commander. "If you let them go, they'll trouble you no more." He studied her for a long moment, perhaps struck by her composure. "You'll hang," he said. "I know," she replied. "But not today. Today, I've bought peace." They led her away in irons. Behind her, the bayou lay silent. Smoke, rising from the ruins of Belmire, mist curling over the water like the breath of ghosts. She didn't look back, because legends don't need to. The soldiers brought Eliza to New Iberia, a river town whose courthouse stood like a stone sentinel above the docks. The journey took 2 days by boat, through waters she had once commanded. Now she sat bound and silent at the bow, her reflection rippling in the river, a woman both mortal and myth. The townspeople lined the shore when they arrived, whispering and pointing. "That's her," someone murmured. "The swamp witch." "The siren that drowned her mistress." Inside the jailhouse, she was locked in a narrow cell that smelled of mildew and iron. The guards avoided her gaze, uneasy in her presence. Some crossed themselves when they passed. One young soldier muttered, "She don't look like no demon." Another replied, "That's what makes her dangerous." 3 days later, her trial began. The courthouse overflowed with spectators, planters, merchants, soldiers, women clutching handkerchiefs to their lips. They had come not for justice, but for a spectacle, eager to glimpse the woman who had defied everything their world was built upon. The judge, a man with a face like carved stone, called her by the name she had been given in bondage, Eliza Monroe, property of the late Henry DuPont of Willow Bend. The words fell heavy in the hush. Property. Even here, at the edge of death, they refused to call her free. The charges were read aloud. Murder, sedition, insurrection. The prosecutor painted her as a monster, a temptress who used deceit and witchcraft to corrupt the minds of loyal slaves and sow rebellion. He spoke of the burning fields, the dead overseers, the chaos in the parishes. She is not a woman, he declared, his voice rising. She is contagion, and contagion must be purged. The gallery murmured in agreement, though some faces were uncertain. A few among them, especially the poor and the enslaved who had managed to slip into the crowd, listened with quiet admiration. Her court-appointed lawyer, a pale man with trembling hands, tried to plead for mercy. She was driven to desperation, he argued. She acted from pain, not malice. She sought only freedom, but Eliza refused to speak. She sat still, her expression serene, her eyes clear and far away, as if she were listening to some music only she could hear. When the judge asked if she wished to make a final statement, she rose slowly. The room stilled. "I have nothing to ask of this court," she said, her voice soft but resonant. "You cannot give me freedom. You never could. I took it and I paid its price." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "But remember this. You can chain a body, hang a name, burn a home, but you can't bury the idea that we were born to be free." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the judge slammed his gavel down. Enough. The verdict came as all had expected, guilty on every count. The sentence, death by hanging, to be carried out within the month. When they led her back to her cell, the air was heavy with thunder. A storm had gathered over the river, dark clouds pressing low. She sat by the barred window and watched the lightning trace the horizon. The swamp lay out there beyond the rain, endless, unknowable, waiting. Over the next weeks, preachers came to her cell, eager to save her soul. She listened politely but said little. "My peace ain't yours to grant," she told one. "I already made it." Journalists came too, smelling of ink and arrogance. They begged for confessions, for details that would sell papers. She told them nothing. Each day, she ate the bread they gave her, drank the water, and whispered prayers in a tongue older than the bayou itself. On the morning of her execution, dawn broke crimson, a sky of blood and flame. The guards came early, nervous, avoiding her eyes. She rose before they could speak. "I'm ready," she said simply. The gallows stood in the town square, draped with wet rope and rain-dark wood. Hundreds gathered to witness what they believed would be the end of a rebellion. Soldiers formed a ring to keep the crowd back. Among them stood enslaved field hands brought by their masters to see and remember. But not all faces were hostile. Scattered through the mass were those who had come for another reason, to see a woman die unbroken. When Eliza appeared, the murmurs rippled through the crowd. She wore a simple white dress, the same one she had been captured in, now washed and pressed. Her wrists were bound, but her head was high. The executioner hesitated as he placed the rope around her neck, his hands trembling. The priest began to recite. "May God have mercy on your soul," Eliza interrupted, her voice clear as river water. "God's been with me every step." She turned to face the crowd, her gaze sweeping across them. "Freedom," she said, "ain't something you wait for someone to give you. It's something you take, even if it kills you." Then she smiled, small, serene, almost defiant. "And death don't end freedom, it only carries it further." The lever dropped. The sound that followed wasn't silence, it was wind, rustling through the trees, whispering through the square. Some swore the air grew warm, as though the swamp itself had exhaled. That night, the river rose higher than it had in years. The storm flooded the docks and swallowed part of the road. The next morning, fishermen claimed they saw a figure gliding through the fog, a woman in white, walking across the water, her reflection rippling in the current. Soon, the stories began. They said the Bayou Siren returned with every storm, that she guided the lost through the cypress maze, leading the runaway and the hunted toward freedom. Others claimed she appeared at night by the ruins of Willow Bend, her voice mingling with the wind through the reeds, singing the old songs. The cruel feared her. The broken prayed to her. Over time, her story spread beyond Louisiana. In whispers and work songs, In hidden churches and midnight gatherings, people spoke of the woman who chose death over chains. Mothers told their daughters her name. Men facing the lash remembered her courage. The bayou reclaimed Willow Bend at last. The big house rotted. The bathhouse crumbled, its marble veined with moss. Travelers said they could still hear water running there. Though no spring remained, a soft lapping sound, as if someone were still bathing beneath the earth. Years later, when slavery fell and the war tore the South apart, soldiers marching through the marshes claimed the fog itself seemed to move with purpose, guiding some, misleading others. Those who meant harm found their boats capsized or their torches drowned. Those seeking refuge found dry ground and hidden paths. They called it Eliza's mercy. Mama Brigitte lived to see freedom declared. Old and nearly blind, she would sit by the swamp's edge, telling the children of Belmire about the woman who turned fear into fire. "She ain't gone," she'd say, tapping her chest. "She just changed her shape." In time, Eliza Monroe became part of Louisiana's living memory, a legend told wherever courage was needed. The plantation that had birthed her suffering vanished into the bayou's hunger, but her story remained, not carved in stone or scripture, but carried in the breath of those who still refuse to kneel. Some say that when the moon is low and the fog creeps in thick from the water, you can still see her walking the swamp's edge, her white dress glimmering through the trees. She doesn't speak. She only looks back once, as if to say, "Freedom lives here," and then she disappears again into the bayou that took her and gave her back as legend.